Oh,
All
Okay.
right, Jane's
all
Addiction.
right. All right, all right. Jane's Addiction. So, this is the first time we're covering Jane's Addiction, and in the opening, this is their album Nothing Shocking. In the opening montage, you heard a clip from Jane Says, and now you're going to hear a clip from Mountain Song. Nothing Shocking comes in at number 98. I'm sorry, never mind. 104. I was looking at the wrong album. Number 104 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums. Number 11 in 1988. Number 690 of all time. It's Jane's Addiction's second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind their 1990 release Ritual de lo Habitual. And we're gonna cover that one later for next season, I think. So
90s, yep.
in the 90s, yep. This Nothing Shocking did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Jane's Addiction is ranked number 326 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
So it's the 108, Matt? Is that what you said?
Well, in the 80s, yes.
Okay.
10, I'm sorry, no, 104.
Oh, I wrote 10 on the spreadsheet. I was like,
You wrote
what?
10?
Yeah, I think forgot that last character.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it's 104. So, all right, little history on the band here. So they were formed after, Perry Farrell, who many of you might be aware of, is the lead singer of Jane's Addiction, and he started to form Jane's Addiction after a previous band of his kind of broke up. That band was called Psycom. It was a post-punk band of the early 80s, and they don't have a whole lot of stuff on Spotify, but there was a couple of tracks I listened to that were pretty decent. I thought Psycom wasn't too bad.
Not a good name, in my opinion.
PSICOM is how it's maybe it's Psycom. I thought it was Psy. I don't know, but post-punk. So there you go. Love that post-punk. And so Perry Farrell was looking to replace the bass player for that band while they were still kind of technically together. And at that time, he was introduced by a gentleman named Eric Avery, and they bonded over a mutual love of Joy Division and the Velvet Underground, much like many other bands in the 80s and 90s, probably.
That's like like the perfect syncretic combo, isn't it? Like, let's take the 60s one and the 70s one.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so they played together, but Avery never joined the band Psycom, and shortly after that band was dissolved and Jane's Addiction was formed with Perry Farrell and Avery. So the name of the band came from a woman that Perry Farrell was living with as his housemate. Her name was Jane Bainter, and he viewed her as his muse. So he was inspired by that. And looking to round out other members of the band, Avery's sister Rebecca had recommended her boyfriend Stephen Perkins as the drummer, and so he joins the band. And Perkins and his girlfriend Rebecca then recommended their friend Dave Navarro to be the lead guitarist, and so he was joined that way. So Perry Farrell's sister, pretty integral. I'm sorry, Avery's. That wasn't Perry Farrell's sister. It was Avery's sister that was pretty integral in creating this band, or putting them all together. They start playing on the LA circuit. They developed a following, including interest from a number of different record labels, and they ended up signing with Warner Brothers. However, this was weird. I didn't really see much more detail on this, but I guess they signed with Warner Brothers, but they insisted that their first record, their debut album, be released on an independent label, which happened. Their first album's self-titled Jane's Addiction, and it was released by X Records, and it's a live album, actually. So that was technically their first record. But they did negotiate, their manager did negotiate a large advanced upfront fee from Warner Brothers in the realm of, it said so, it was somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000, which was quite a bit of money to be giving a band right off the bat. And so they had a bunch of money to play around with. At this point, around this time in 1987, they did open up for former Bauhaus vocalist Peter Murphy. So we covered them. That was maybe that was our first episode of the 80s. I think we covered Bauhaus. So that's a CTS callback there. And in January of 1988, they went into the studio to record this album, Nothing Shocking, and they were given a list of different producers to choose from by Warner Brothers, and they settled on a producer named Dave Jordan, who had previously worked on several CTS records, actually mostly as an engineer. I think this record that we're covering today was one of the first albums that he actually produced, but he was mostly an engineer, and he worked on albums such as Remain in Light by the Talking Heads, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts by David Byrne and Brian Eno. It's another Brian Eno's going to make all three episodes, or all three albums this episode. And then there were other albums that he worked on later on, or around that time, by the Rolling Stones, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Frank Zappa, and Herbie Hancock. So he was experienced there. Jordan jumped at the chance to work with Jane's Addiction and was given a demo tape of 18 songs from the band, and he picked 9 of them that he said were going to be on the album, and he asked the band to rehearse them in a particular order and record them in a particular order. So the songs here were chosen from the producer. This is my favorite story of this record. I guess during the recording sessions for this record, Perry Farrell made a demand to the rest of the band that he should be awarded 50% of their publishing rights for writing the lyrics of all these songs, and then get a quarter of the remaining half for writing the music, which would add up to 62.5% of the overall publishing rights. And this did not sit well with the other band members, and they actually at one point stormed out, and as the producer was coming in to work with them, he was basically told that they are breaking up and that the album's done and they're not gonna proceed. So Warner Brothers held an emergency meeting with the band to try to patch things up, and the result of this meeting, Perry Farrell got everything that he wanted. So he signed on, got the 62.5%. Rest of the members, the other 3 band members, earned 12.5% of the cut. And Avery later said that this had a profound effect on the band and might be a big reason why they did not last very long.
Yeah, not surprising.
Yep. And then in
I'm
addition
pretty sure
to this,
still don't get along, right? To this day.
I don't know. We're going to find out about that. I realized this is like the rare instance where we're doing a bio, and then I'm like, I'm going to get to do the bio again in the 90s. So I'm going to cover that later. So I think that they did get back together like here and there and stuff. So, but at this time, Perry Farrell and Avery, their relationship was further strained. I guess Avery started, he had newfound sobriety, so that wasn't really gelling well with Perry Farrell. And then there was an incident where Farrell felt that Avery was trying to hook up with his girlfriend, so there was some issues with that.
In fairness, when you take 62.5%, you are inviting intrigue, aren't you? So yeah.
Yeah. At least he didn't have sex with his girlfriend in the studio, trying to, making the noises for the
or on the bed. Yeah. Can I mention, by the way, that last week I was just a quick aside right here. So for anybody listening on YouTube, I apologize. We're referencing a story from the Guns N' Roses episode, but I love to take ridiculous stories and make the people in them the corollaries, like people in my life, because it makes it more absurd, right? And so in that case, that story was hilarious. So you have 2 members of the band, right? One guy's dating a girl and the other guy is having sort of casual sex with his girlfriend, sort of implicitly as an okay thing, right? And then the other guy is passed out on the bed and gets woken up and gets asked to join. So I was thinking that would be like the equivalent of if like Matt was dating someone, I was sleeping with her, and then Josh fell asleep on the bed, woke up, and I said, hey, let's have a go right there, which is patently absurd, right? But it's a thing that happened. Anyway, continue.
Only in Guns N' Roses
Only in Guns
world.
N' Roses.
Yeah. So the writing process varied from song to song, but all the members did contribute to the writing of them. And Jane Says and Pigs and Zen were actually both on their debut album, but they were re-recorded for this record. Flea makes an appearance on here, playing trumpet on Idiot's Rule.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. And the cover image of this record features a sculpture of two nude female conjoined twins on a rocking chair with their heads on fire. Perry Farrell had this image in his head that this is kind of what he wanted, so he hired Warner Brothers. It's like I think it was maybe a dream or something like that, or like during a
chemically altered dream. Yeah, it has to be. Yeah.
So he hired Warner Brothers employees to create the sculpture, and he was giving them directions on what to do. But after learning how to create the sculptures himself by just watching them, he fired them and decided to do it himself. So he actually made the sculptures that you see on the cover of this record.
He got 62%.
62 it out, yes. 9 of 11 major record store chains refused to carry the record because of the naked
cover.
Ladies on the front. So they ended up having to cover it with brown paper to sleep at night and be able to sell this record. It also had some controversy because Mountain Song was released as a single, but MTV refused to play it due to the nudity depicted in the video. So because of this, the lack of airplay, there wasn't a ton of airplay on the radio. The album did not sell terribly well. They sold roughly 200,000 copies in the first year of release, and it took all the way till 1998 before it was certified platinum, meaning it sold 1 million copies. Actually, Mountain Song was released prior to this record. It was it was on the soundtrack for a movie called Dudes. Josh, did you ever see Dudes starring John Cryer?
No, I think I know of it though.
So it's
I'll
on that.
give a quick review. It's terrible.
So Dudes with John Cryer, that song is on there as well. So so that's basically the bio. After this was released, they did open for Iggy Pop and the Ramones, but they started getting enough success on their own that they started to headline their own shows. We will cover them again in the next season, so we'll do more bio and talk about their demise on that record on that season. But yeah, generally speaking, this album was well regarded amongst the critics at the time. It just did not sell a ton. And I think we have to go with Josh. I think it's your turn to go first here, sir. What did you think of Nothing Shocking?
Well, I'd like to interject and say Dudes is directed by Penelope Spheris of Decline of Western Civilization, Wayne's World, and other movies. So it
may not suck.
So it's probably good.
Gem. Yeah. We'll see. It's on Peacock and Tubi if you are interested. But,
Letterboxd.
Yes. Yep.
Josh's Movie Corner.
I'll add it. But okay, back to the album. So I don't know if you guys are surprised about this, but I only knew Jane Says and from this album, and maybe that's the only Jane's Addiction song I know other by name. And...
No, you know so? Big Caught Stealing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Big Caught Stealing.
I'm kind of shocked.
5.
Yeah,
I'm kind of shocked you didn't know Mountain Song.
No, but Mountain Song ruled.
Okay, well, yeah. That's why I'm surprised you didn't know it.
Yeah. So yeah, I really like this album. It was a pleasant surprise, and my hot take is that the rest of the album is better than Jane Says. So you can't really go by that song and know what the rest of the album sounds like. At least to me. I really like, obviously they got multiple guitars on here that they have this kind of big sound. It's kind of slightly psychedelic, maybe. It's also kind of reminiscent of a lot of like 70s rock, almost a little bit of Black Sabbath, but not as like heavy. I think maybe some of the guitar sounds like that. I really like the drums on this album are really good and really work in sync with kind of the guitars. Perry Farrell's voice is it's effective. Sometimes it is slightly annoying to me depending on kind of like the song or maybe even a period in the song. It just kind of sticks out sometimes and not in a good way. But overall, I think the strength of the music balances that out or kind of negates that annoyance from me. It's just kind of a great overall like rock and roll album, in vein of Guns N' Roses, but it doesn't sound like Guns N' Roses. It's not I don't know, as violent maybe. It's kind of the lyrics and kind of some of the themes of the album are a little sillier, maybe a little like more drug induced in a different way, like a psychedelic drug induced type of sound. But it's also got this energy to it. It's propulsive. It's kind of like speedy and wiry at times, and that's reflected in his singing as well. The Idiot's Rule is interesting because it's kind of funk inflected, and the horns are really kind of come out of nowhere because there's no horns on the rest of the album, and so I really like that. Like I said, Mountain Song really rules. You can definitely kind of also feel a slight like Led Zeppelin influence. I mean, it's hard not to for like every rock album.
Slight influence of Led Zeppelin, Josh. Like,
okay, a lot.
Massive, gigantic influence of Led Zeppelin, to me at least. Yeah.
So that really works for me too, because I mean, we all love Led Zeppelin listening to those albums. But yeah, it's just a pleasant surprise overall. The Ted Just Admit It is kind of an interesting song because they got some spoken word or recorded snippets in there as well. And
I believe that's Ted Bundy.
Oh, okay.
That you're
Okay,
hearing?
that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, they're trying to be edgy in that way too. You know, putting serial killers in the mix. But the yeah, it's I'm not doing a good job of describing how the sound is different from the other rock we've heard in the '80s, but it was a fun listen to me. It's going to be pretty, you know, it's definitely for an album I didn't know, it was a great find. And unfortunately, I can, you know, based on Matt's bio, it's unfortunate that they didn't last long, but I feel like they kind of had a unique sound. I think too, they're kind of like adjacent to Red Hot Chili Peppers in some way. The Flea thing is interesting because they kind of have the same type of like vibe to them a little bit, even though they're not.
Dave Navarro joined the Chili Peppers for an album.
Yeah. So even though they're not like as, I don't know, acid, you know, funk as Red Hot Chili Peppers are, at least, you know, in some of those earlier albums, but yeah, thumbs up for me on this one.
Yeah, Jane's Addiction is always such an interesting band for me because they are two different bands. I love Dave Navarro as a guitar player. He has the power of, as you mentioned, Josh, like a Led Zeppelin type guitar riff, but he adds in other influences, right? Like almost like jazzy influences at times to the sound. I love Stephen Perkins as a drummer. I mean, he hits the living shit out of the drums, like is one of the things every time I listen to like Jane's Addiction. Like it's one of the first things I notice is just how hard he plays, right? Like frantically playing at times, just pounding the drums. There's no subtlety to his drumming, which works really well in the tracks, and the bass lines are fantastic by Eric Avery. So you've got a lot of running bass lines and even, you know, funky bass lines at times. That might be a little bit, Josh, where I think you might see a little bit of the overlap with the Chili Peppers. Yeah. But yeah, you've got the hard drumming. You've got Dave Navarro, who plays these, you know, these big blues rock inspired, almost metal, like a combo, like where metal meets blues, right? It's kind of like Dave Navarro's guitar sound, I would say, and very prominent. I really hate Perry Farrell as a lead singer, though. Like he actively takes away from Jane's Addiction for me at times. So I endure Perry Farrell to get the rest of the Jane's Addiction experience. I respect Perry Farrell as an interesting lyricist and the creative sort of engine of the group. And aesthetically, I think he's very much to a credit, right, to what alternative became in the 90s. I also think he's an interesting guy when you see him interviewed, albeit I think he'd be incredibly difficult to be in a band with. But yes, like his voice and his singing style, I often have wondered like what like Jane's Addiction would sound like with a different lead singer, which is, there's a couple bands I feel that way about, and I've mentioned it in other ones, but he definitely is falls in that category for me. And there are plenty of singers that I like who do not have traditional voices, or some people might even not love their voices. You know, people, I know Matt always mentions like Billy Corgan with the Smashing Pumpkins, but that works great for me. I know some people like Morrissey's a barrier, right, for the Smiths and stuff like that. So, and those are bands I love, but Perry Farrell can be hard for me sometimes.
Where does he match up compared to David Byrne? Because I think that he was one that you brought up for Talking Heads as being a little bit difficult.
That is the other one that always comes to mind for me, Matt. I think that David Byrne, once you get into the later Talking Heads albums, his voice becomes more a piece of the music, right? I thought in the earliest Talking Heads album, Talking Heads 77, whether it be the mix or just, I don't know if it was early and I was just still getting used to it, or if it's just mixed differently, but it was more of a hindrance to me on something like Talking Heads 77 or more songs about building and food than it was in things like Remain in Light later, like albums I love. So that is the example I use often of another impediment. Neither of them keep me from listening and appreciating the albums, but yeah, I mean, it's complementary, Matt. I'd say about the same. But I did kind of get to feel what that was like because I got Dave Navarro and the Chili Peppers, and I will always say that One Hot Minute was a completely underrated Red Hot Chili Peppers album, and one of the reasons is because I love the combination of Flea and Dave Navarro. as guitar parts because it reminded me of Jane's Addiction to some degree, who I love. I think what stood out to me about this album, and I hope I explained some of the sound there, Josh, a little bit that you were trying to get to, like pounding on the drums, funk and jazz influenced bass lines and influences, but the lead guitar parts being inspired by Led Zeppelin and even metal at times. You mentioned Black Sabbath. I don't know if it would be that dark. I think it's actually more big metal, like arena metal, and stuff like that. I know that they were inspired by, as you mentioned, Matt, like post-punk influences, and I know that often they reference The Cure, but I don't get a lot of Cure in them. That when I did my own research on Jane's Addiction way back when, they always were sort of referenced with them, but I've never gotten that vibe from them. But yeah, really great album this week. It doesn't quite get to the barrier of great album for me because it doesn't quite have the consistency I would need in a great album, because you have like Summertime Rolls is a song that doesn't do much. Once they get into past the 4.5 minute mark, the songs, in my opinion, aren't as strong. So like Ted just admitted, in Summertime Rolls are songs that don't do as much to me as something like Idiot's Rule, which is a really interesting song for me. I love Ocean Size. Obviously the two singles, Jane Says is another song about addiction. And obviously the Jane of this is the song, is the Jane who I'm pretty sure is the one with the addiction. Great band name, by the way, Jane's Addiction. I'd like to point out that is a pretty fantastic name on a number of fronts. Yeah, and Mountain Song is awesome. It's just this grinding, like bass line and guitar riff going. And Perry Farrell's voice, by the way, does work on that because it's almost call and response how it's used. And that song, if you notice, that song is almost played like you're scaling a mountain sonically, sound-wise, if you hear it, which we mentioned that in the earlier album thing. I am a sucker for songs that sound like thematically what they're about, and that's a great example of that type of song. So, yeah, I mean, gotta like this one. I was hoping and thinking that it would rise into that upper canon for me of 80s albums. I don't know if it quite gets there for me, but still very much recommend. And another one of these albums that peeks into what alternative music is going to sound like in the early 90s as well. So you're getting a little bit of a preview. So, thumbs up.
Yeah, I think the Black Sabbath thing for me was specifically that first album when it was kind of more bluesy before they went full like down-tuned guitars and
sludge,
stuff. Yeah, there was something in that quality of this album that reminded me of that album. Maybe the Mountain Song specifically, but maybe it was just Led Zeppelin too in general. Yeah.
Well, so first of all, I think, John, you should have had the first take on that. I think I screwed that up, so my apologies about that. Second of all, the actual was Perry Farrell. I didn't mention this, but you're talking about the name of the band. I guess when he was tossing around ideas for the band's name with his girlfriend at the time, he said they were thinking about band names, and his girlfriend, she threw in Jane's Heroin Experience, but I thought that it wasn't vague enough, so he went with Jane's Addiction.
Is that like supposed to be like the Jimi Hendrix Experience?
I would guess so.
Is that what they were going for?
Jane's Heroin, but I guess so I guess Jane had her drug issues, so that was based on some truth. So my experience with Jane's Addiction, so this was interesting because I absolutely remember the Ben Caught Stealing video that was on MTV, and that video, I hated that video. I was just like, I hated the Perry Farrell.
Really?
Was just like,
that's a great video.
No, I didn't like the guy. It was just creepy looking with the guy that was all dressed up and stealing all the food, and then Perry Farrell had the stocking over his face that was smushing his nose into him, and he was kind of doing this goofy dance and stuff. I'm like, who is this dork? Like, what's he doing? Like, I was just not really into it. So, and then it was also kind of one of those things that for whatever reason, I think, John, you mentioned this a couple episodes back, where like, maybe what band was it that you said the band's name kind of just, you never really gave them a chance, but you're like, I don't like that name, so I'm just not really going to get that. Like it was totally judging a book by its cover.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh.
I forget who it was.
I'll have to think about who it was. Yeah, and then I knew I probably should like them.
Or...
No, it was a band that we were familiar with.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't really. John didn't really.
I'll get back to you as you're giving your take.
But it's the point being that it was a similar kind of thing that in my head maybe because of that, and I think I probably saw Perry Farrell interviewed and before, and he does have this kind of like way about him that's very pretentious and arrogant and stuff, and I was like, this guy's a dick, and I was so probably something like that. I kind of just wrote him off. I don't need to get into them or whatever. Although I did for a minute own the Porno for Pyros album. Which was his band after Jane's Addiction. I think I got that through like the CD Music Club or whatever. I don't know why, but
something that doesn't exist anymore.
No,
Pet Shop Boys.
Pet Shop Boys. There you go. Yep, that was a
good
couple.
Call. Yep.
Right. So I did go into this with an open mind, and I really like this album too. It was I don't know if I would necessarily say that I was surprised by that, but I was probably surprised to the degree that I did like it, because it's all that stuff you guys. I was thinking the same thing, right? It's definitely got metal, like the guitar. You're right, John. Like some of those soaring guitar parts. It's like that's, you're starting getting into like real like Nuaba heavy metal, kind of stuff there.
Absolutely.
You're getting definitely the Zeppelin, the harder, especially something like Mountain Song is very, it's very aggressive, very, great riffs.
Cashmere type riff. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, very powerful. Chili Peppers for sure. Even without the knowing Dave Navarro played for them, there's that funk nature of happening in these songs. There's punk, like Had a Dad is a very kind of punk it's like a punk sounding type song. And then you're also getting that 90s alt rock stuff. The way it opens up with up the Beach. That's sounds like a 90s kind of alt rock song. Summertime Rolls is kind of like a psychedelic 90s type song. I actually like that song. I thought I can see why it's a little bit of an outlier, I think, on this record.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I really liked it though. I thought it was kind of a nice little change of pace, and I liked it's got a kind of a cool groove. Sounds a little bit
down a bit.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a little bit of a druggy song, it's like, hey, let's go smoke a bowl and listen to, Summertime Rolls or whatever, songs like that.
That's a good idea.
Kind of, yeah, there you go. Jane Says that's the one song I knew on here the best. I think I probably heard Mountain Song here or there, but that Jane Says is the only one that stood out as being a song that I felt like pretty familiar with. But it's consistent, and even a song like Ted Just Admit It, which probably, I don't know if I would say it's my least favorite song in here, but it's the song that took me the most to get into. I think it does have a cool bass line. It kind of goes in different directions and stuff, and it took me a little while to kind of figure out what was happening with it. I would probably agree with you, John. It probably doesn't need to be 7.5 minutes or close to it. But I found myself liking that more as the week went on, and Pigs and Zen's a crazy song to end with. Thank You Boys is kind of a throwaway song. It's just kind of, right, like a minute long kind of thing. So, but yeah, really solid. Like a lot of energy, a lot of creativity. Perry Farrell's voice, even though I was kind of put off by him, early when I was like in high school or whatever. I wouldn't say that his voice bothers me. I think that I think I'm okay with that, his distinct voice there. I don't know if I would say it would be better with somebody else. I don't know. I think I'm fine. I'm fine with that. So I could totally see why this was, an important record. It's got a lot of different things. It's one of those records that we've talked about before that's both backward and forward looking.
Yeah.
And, it's drawing upon a lot of different influences, and it's also creating their own sound and making it their own thing. And, this is the beginning of, I think Perry Farrell, coined the term alternative nation, that this is like the alternative rock movement kind of, it's where what it became in the 90s, starts with, this is one of the, the beginning of that kind of movement, I would say, or one of the records that represented the beginning of that. So yeah, just really solid. Should not be judging that book by the cover, but I found myself really into this, and I don't think that there's anything on here that I disliked when all was said and done. So yeah, I'm a thumbs up on this, and I'm looking forward to their next album, which is ranked higher than this. That's the one that's been caught stealing. So, and just thinking about that song, even though I didn't like the video, it's got a cool like bass. Is that like a bass or guitar riff or something? That's
it's a bass line.
Yeah,
bass line.
So So that's kind of a cool part there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that record as well.
Well, it's a bass line, and also once again, just the crushing the drums.
Yeah. And the dog barking. There's dog barking.
Right.
Yeah. But that I should also mention, which we slightly touched on as stuff. It should be noted that this lyrically, sonically, and in all fronts, the psychedelic end of it is because this is absolutely a drug album. Yeah. Like this is very much couched in like drug album culture. So I did not listen to this under the influence, but I would imagine it would be an experience that could theoretically be enhanced from that world as well. So yeah.
And they were in LA. This is all in LA. I don't think I mentioned that. So they're definitely an LA band as well.
Yeah, I kind of got that sense from listening to it in some way. But you're right too, Matt. It's like a bridging album in some way from all the 70s rock that we liked to kind of what rock became. And it is, the rock we've listened to in the 80s, this is kind of different than that. And you've kind of got the, like you said, the new waba, and the post-punk is not really like this, and there's obviously been a lot of synth added to rock music that we have listened to in this decade. And yeah, it is kind of like now stepping into that 90s sound that we know.
Yep.
You want another weird note I wrote down on this, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, but I'll throw it out here to see what you think. I wrote down, while because of their first single they got compared to Pearl Jam a lot, I think that in many ways Stone Temple Pilots were trying to sound like Jane's Addiction.
Oh yeah.
Let that sit for a little bit. Yeah. Tell me what you think. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're also druggy for sure, but
yeah. Well, I think it's cool. Like that's why it's interesting to listen to these albums back in retrospect, right? Because if you listened to this album at the time, you certainly would have gotten all the Led Zeppelin and that kind of the metal, even the metal stuff that had happened already. But the stuff that was kind of going to come down the line, you wouldn't have known that this is going to be like a massive thing, but it also sounded different too. So, but now looking back on it, it's kind of cool to put it all in that context together because what's coming. And what Perry Farrell and Lollapalooza, all that stuff, that was, that kind of changed the way that, concerts happen. In fact, that really popularized the festival, took the Woodstock thing and just made it like way bigger. And now that happens, that's like almost the preferred way of seeing shows now, is like festivals all over the place now, and he was one of the first people that did that. So, so props to him for that,
Well, wasn't that designed as Jane's Addiction's like going away tour initially? I think it might have been. Yeah. Of Lollapalooza was that, and like Perry Farrell's dream of art mixing with political issues and music. And by the way, I think I might have answered my own question, because I think maybe Scott Weiland's the front man that I would have wanted for Jane's Addiction. Maybe that's my answer right there. But I'll have to think about that a little bit more. But okay.
And the first Lollapalooza was in '91. It says.
Yeah, and that used to travel. Like the festivals used to, like that, and Horde used to travel from city to city, and now it's like,
I went to the second
Chicago.
Lollapalooza, but not the first one.
I went to the first one that was in Chicago, that it was stationary in Chicago in 2005.
Nice.
Oh God, that was like decades later, Matt. I'm talking about, I went to the one in like the early 90s. Yeah.
No, I know that. I'm saying but it was that way for a while, then it stopped, and then they repurposed it, and now it's like it's only in Chicago now. So
I have a good story that I can't tell on this podcast about how I got that ticket too. So
there you go. So yeah, it sounds like 3 thumbs up there, and we're gonna cover them again with another bio. So nice. in the next season. So there you go. Check it out. It's good stuff.